Opposition leaders Pierre Poilievre and Jagmeet Singh today pointing fingers at the government's economic record after the Bank of Canada held its key lending rate at 5%. While that's not an increase, it is still a more than 20-year high. It's all aimed at taming inflation, and the bank today warned it could raise rates again if needed, saying in a statement the bank remains resolute in its commitment to restoring price stability for Canadians. High rates are one of several factors contributing, to a housing crisis in much of the country, pushing people out of the market and driving up rental costs. Take a look at this. A report last month from rental.ca found the average asking rent of a one-bedroom more than $1,800 in August. You can see for a two-bedroom, it's higher than $2,200. A new survey from Nanos Research done exclusively for our program shows the housing crunch has political ramifications too. When asked which federal party do you trust most on the issue of affordable housing, 25% responded the Conservatives, 22% said the NDP, and 15% said the Liberals. Notably, 22% of those surveyed said they didn't trust any party. Federal Housing Minister Sean Fraser is with us live now. Hi, Minister Fraser. Good to have you here. Thank you for making the time.
Hi, it's a pleasure to be with you.
That survey, Minister, shows Canadians are more trusting right now of the opposition than your government to fix the housing crisis. What do you take from that?
I take from not only the results that you've just broadcast, but from my conversations that people want to see the federal government step up and play a leadership role, not just on affordable housing for low-income families, but more broadly on housing that's affordable for middle-class families as well. We got back into the housing game about 5-6 years ago with the adoption of the National Housing Strategy, but I've heard loud and clear in recent months that they want us to do more. Canadians want to see us take action across the housing spectrum. So families from different backgrounds have a place to live, and Canadians should expect over the next few months to see new measures advanced that's going to help address housing affordability across Canada.
Can you be more specific, Minister, and I know you've only been in the job a few months now, but about that timeline? So in a few months, by the fall economic statement, for example, will there be a new housing plan from your government?
I expect in advance of the fall economic statement and potentially as part of the fall economic statement, there will be a suite of measures that we put forward, but I'm not going to wait for some artificial date to share news of things that could help build more houses today. We've already gotten to work by negotiating with different municipalities around their access to the Housing Accelerator Fund. Notably, the City of London has already made changes in response to our correspondence to allow more densification in the city core that's going to build more homes for people. Part of the next step is going to be helping change the financial equation for developers who've been bitten fairly by that higher interest rate, and for families who now can't afford the mortgage payments that they entered into just a number of months ago. When we actually change the equation to make it an incentive for developers to build homes that regular people can afford, I think that we can actually incentivize the outcomes that we want. It's not going to be easy. It's not going to happen overnight, but I think I owe it to Canadians to demonstrate that we're working hard and are not just waiting for the fall economic statement, but in advance of that, be releasing measures that are going to help build more homes that people can afford.
Can you sympathize with Canadians who, for example, listen to what you say that sounds really nice, and are concerned about your government's ability to make good on that or to produce? And I'll give you some background as to why I'm asking. For example, the Housing Accelerator Fund, something that your government as a party promised to do in the 2021 election campaign platform, set 100,000 homes through that fund, through incentivizing, as you describe it, municipalities would be built over a 3-year period. The program just closed applications. It just launched in June. It's not going to be built by 2024 as the original campaign promised. Can you sympathize with Canadians who are worried that though you're making promises that sound good, you won't deliver on them?
Look, I understand people's reservations anytime they're dealing with governments who are trying to advance programs. The reality is we just got back into the space of funding affordable housing for Canadians after several decades of completely being absent at the federal level. Both Liberal and Conservative governments, by the way, share some of the blame for that result. The last number of years, that focus has really been on social housing that's subsidized by the government. Canadians will not have seen the renewed focus for housing for middle-class families that we hope to bring this fall. The Housing Accelerator Fund, as you pointed out, just had applications close recently, and people should expect to see funding decisions and changes to the way municipalities issue building permits within months. In fact, we've already seen the very first applicant that I expect will have news to share on make a change before the funding actually arrived in anticipation of the decision that I need to take. Canadians are rightly frustrated with the challenges they're experiencing when it comes to affordability, when it comes to the impact of inflation on their household budgets. But the reality is that's why we sign up for public office. We're going to do what we can to support people, low-income families, middle-class families, get the homes that they deserve, because the cost to the economy and to our communities is too great not to come through. I'm going to do everything that I can to pull the levers that are at my disposal to build more homes, and hopefully Canadians will see action in a matter of weeks that will translate into real progress.
It's just on that point, though, that I challenge you, because I do understand completely what you're saying about the federal government leaving the space of housing. You're absolutely correct. But to say that you're just getting into the space and you're just starting to kind of address what other governments previous to yours have not done, or who left the space, you didn't just start in government, with all due respect. And the problem, while exacerbated in the last number of years, 18 months because of interest rate hikes, certainly existed during COVID. Housing prices in 2021 rose on average 26%. So to offer up to Canadians now that they can trust you because this is a new thing that you are just getting into, is that not a bit disingenuous since you have been in power for 8 years?
No, and let me articulate the distinction. The need when we came into office in 2015 was really for the federal government, first and foremost, to get back into funding social housing that's subsidized by the federal government for low-income families. I take your point that more recently the dynamics may have changed, but the conditions may have been changing through the pandemic. But I take issue with the assertion that things are not fundamentally different very recently. You'll agree, I'm sure, Vassy, that during the pandemic, we were dealing with record low interest rates that allowed people both to build and to cover the cost of a mortgage more effectively than they can today. In recent months, we've seen the situation worsen significantly. I've heard loud and clear over the summer that the change in circumstances demands additional action that the federal government had not already been intending to take, over and above the Housing Accelerator Fund commitment that we've made previously. We're working hard to develop those plans.
Respectfully, though, just to interrupt for you a second, pardon me, Minister, but just to be clear, you're saying just in the past few months it got to a place that necessitates the response that you're now prepared to make. I think there are a lot of people in Toronto and in Vancouver and in other large urban centers who could not afford a home in 2021, in 2020, who would argue that life has been that the crisis has existed prior to this. And in fact, in 2017, when you rolled out a housing plan, in 2021, in the election campaign, when your party also rolled out another housing plan, your party acknowledged that very fact, that housing was in a crisis situation. So again, is it not disingenuous to say this is just the past few months that necessitates the response you're now prepared to provide?
So, but let's not pretend that there was no action taken in response to some of the very real challenges that you've identified. If I look back to the 2021 campaign, that's why we created the Housing Accelerator Fund, to change the rules for municipalities to issue permits more quickly. That's why we had previously been trying to build out an ecosystem of affordable units through the National Housing Strategy. It's not as though we'd suddenly woke up one day and realized things are challenging where before everything was simple and easy. But I think it's incumbent upon us to recognize that life has become harder for people. We need to continue to put forward affordability measures as we have for the past 8 years. But in addition to measures to support families, to support students, to support seniors, they want to see the government help lead the charge to build more homes. They don't want us to point fingers at other political parties. They don't want us to point fingers at other levels of government. They want us to get to work within the areas that we control, and they want us to incentivize behavior change, both at other levels of government and within the private sector. So I do think more recent changes demand further action, but I wouldn't yield the point that we've not been active on the file altogether. But I think we can agree that everyone recognizes the federal government needs to step up in a serious leadership role to inspire the kind of change at every level of government and within the nonprofit and private sectors that's going to deliver more housing to Canadians at prices that ordinary people can afford to pay.
Okay, Minister, I'm out of time. I always appreciate your time. Thank you very much.
A pleasure. Thanks so much, Vassy.